Hey guys, what's up? So this video is brought to you by Linode Hosting. If you guys are looking for reliable, fast web hosting, I've been using Linode for over 8 years. It's what I use for CodeHawk, for every website I've had for the last 8 years. So I've done business with them for a long time, but now they're sponsoring the channel, which is really cool because I can actually vouch for the product. Linode is growing fast. They have a new data center that they just opened in Toronto, and they're opening new data centers all the time. So make sure you guys check them out. There's a $20 discount in the link below. Hey guys, what's up? So in this new tutorial series, we're going to be looking at how to build a single page app using Python's web framework called Flask. And Flask is a popular web framework that's used by Netflix, Reddit, and a bunch of other companies. Most companies that use Python as a stack for a web-based language are using Flask or Django. Those are the two biggest ones. So Flask is a little bit smaller than Django, the other full-featured web framework for Python. So we're going to be choosing Flask since we want to try to keep this tutorial as simple as possible and mostly focus on the single page app fundamentals. So we're not going to be looking at all the latest UI stuff because I think that is going to detract from what we're trying to do with Python. So we're mainly going to be sticking with basic web technologies and then Python and Flask and just kind of sticking to the SPA, SPA, single page app philosophies for development. So in order to get started though, whenever you're dealing with Python, the first thing you have to do is you have to actually go to the Python website and download it just like it's a software application, because that's essentially what it is. And you download it onto your computer, so it works on Mac, Windows, or Linux, and there's going to be different ones that you can download. This tutorial is going to be using the latest version of Python, but whichever version you have, it should be relatively similar as long as it's a Python 3, 5, or higher. If you have Python installed correctly, you should be able to pull up a command prompt like I just did and type Python, and it should launch the interactive interpreter that comes with Python. So you can actually type your Python code right into the terminal and get the output. It's a good way of testing stuff, so just basic math and everything can be done right in the interpreter. Also, this is using 3.7.3, so again, there's probably a later version, and if you want to grab the latest, that's probably fine as well. Leather. All right, the next thing to note is that we're going to be using Visual Studio Code as our editor that we're going to type our code into. So when you have it installed, again, you just have to download it, and it works cross-platform, and it's free. Just go ahead and launch the application. It's a relatively simple IDE, or integrated development environment / text editor. You can do all of your Python debugging inside of this by going to this little square icon for your extensions, and if you type Python in here, the #1 result you should get is the one that's been downloaded like 1,000,000 times, and actually maybe 50 million times. That's what it says here. So make sure you have this installed, because this is going to give you the ability to have Python highlighting. It's going to give you hinting so that it'll automatically complete your code, and it allows you to actually step through and pause your code in execution so that we can see what's going on behind the scenes with our code. So now that we have everything that we need to go ahead and figure out where is our project going to be situated here. So I'm going to go ahead and have inside my projects folder, I'm going to go ahead and just create a Flask. I'm going to say create a new folder for Flask. All right, and then we're going to go and just say, you know what, we want to select this folder with Visual Studio Code to open up the editor to that folder. And you're going to see on the left-hand side, if you have your Documents Explorer selected, that there is no documents inside the project because we just created it. But what we want to do is we're going to right-click and say Open in Terminal. So if you right-click from within inside the documents here and say Open in Terminal, it's going to open up a command prompt to where that folder is. And then this is where we're going to go ahead and install Flask. So we're going to say pip install Flask. All right, so pip is the package manager that comes with Python. It's how everybody uses Python to install other Python programs and stuff. So if everything went well, you should have a screen similar to mine. And you can see that we have Flask now installed. All right, so let's go ahead and create our first file, which is going to be, we're just going to create an app.py file. And inside of here, let me go ahead and make this bigger. All right, so inside of here, there's going to be the simple Hello World application that is shown on Flask documentation, and we just want to get this working. Now, one of the interesting things is that you do have to actually set your Flask app environment variable to the application that you want to run. And in here you can see our application is called app.py. So if I were going to add this and add it to my environment variable, I can go ahead and do that by simply saying set, and then I'm telling the Flask app shortcut command for Windows to say, hey, I want you to equal the name of the file that we just created. So Flask app equals app.py. So we just set that as our command line using Windows, and it is slightly different for different environments, but you just have to set your environment variable. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and just execute the Flask application by running Python with the m flag. So you say Python m flag, and then you just say Flask run, and it's automatically going to run the application that you set it to. So here you can see, if everything goes well, if I click on this, I'm just going to simply get the hello world, and that's what we have here. So we have a working Flask application on Windows just like that. Now, if your server is running, if you go inside the terminal and you press Control-C, it's going to kill the server. So that's how you actually exit out of it. So Control-C or Command-C. All right, so if you want to go ahead and get the app running again, just press up on your arrow key. It's going to pull up the last command that you ran. Press Enter, and you can have it running again. So we're going to Control-click. We can see our hello world message. What I want to do now, though, is I do want to show you guys how to enable debugging. If we were to say, you know what, this is going to return a number, which is invalid, so we have to restart the server and make sure this is saved for this to take effect. And we're going to say Flask run, and then when we go to this, we're now going to get this internal server error. But it doesn't give us any information. This is the basic hidden, like the actual error that occurred is hidden behind the scenes, because typically you do not want your end users to see what sort of stack trace errors are going on, because then they can manipulate the system. So by default, Flask is enabled in the production environment, and if we were going to change that, we need to go ahead and kill our server, and we're going to go ahead and say set, and we're going to say, just like we did before, we're going to say set the Flask environment. This has to be capitalized, and we're going to say it equals development. All right, so now we've set this to equal development. So if we go ahead and press up again and run the app, and now we get some different information. You can see that its debug mode is turned on. It's starting to give a little bit more information here. And if we control click, instead of actually getting the 500 error message that didn't give us any information, this thing tells us the exact error. It says, like, you're returning an int, and that's not valid. Like, it needs to be a string, tuple, response instance, or WSGI callable, but it was an int. So I intentionally broke the application so that we could get a 500 error message, changing this back to hello world, obviously. And you don't have to restart, by the way. In debug mode, it should automatically restart, which is great. But you go over here and you get hello world again. All right, so right now we're returning a simple string, and that's really not going to work in the real world. So what we want to do is we actually want to do some imports from the Flask library so that we can return an actual HTML template. And what we need to do is say from Flask import render template. And if you do get suggestions when you're typing, if you just press tab, if you want the suggestion that it's giving you, you press tab, it'll complete that for you. All right, so what we're going to do here is, instead of returning this hard-coded string, we're going to say return render template, which is a function, and the function is the first argument you got to pass in is the actual template name. So we're just going to call this test.html. And then we can also even pass a variable. So I could say name equals name. So here I can go ahead and define name to pass down, and we can say name equals Chris. All right, so we've actually created a Python variable, and we're going to pass it down to our template, and we can actually reference that from within our template. But first we need to go ahead and create a folder to hold our templates. So we're going to create a templates folder, and then inside of here we're going to create our first file, which is going to be test.html, the same name that we said. Because by default, when this thing says test.html, it's going to look in a folder called templates in the root directory of the project, and it should find test and deliver it for us. Now inside test, let's go ahead and just simply return name. We're just going to have the name, and let's just put it inside of an H1 so that we can see it a little better. And if you want to reference variables inside of the template, you just do so like this through the double curly brace syntax, and then reference the name of the variable that should be passed down. So this should automatically restart. And if we go over to the application, you can see that we are getting Chris back. So now we are rendering back an actual HTML template. So we're getting HTML back instead of just a hard-coded string. And you can see inside the h1 we're actually referencing the Python variable that we returned to our template. Alright guys, so let's look at the next big thing that every HTML web page needs. And since this is returning HTML, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fill this out, right? Let's go ahead and have every HTML page has to have an HTML opening and closing, has to have a head, it should have a title. Here we should go ahead and have a title variable probably for every page. And then after the head, you're going to have a body tag, opening and closing, and we should put the h1 obviously inside the body so it'll show up. And now we have a full featured web page. But clearly we're referencing this title and this name. So for right now, we're going to go ahead and go back here. We're going to change this to title, and we're just going to call this our website. All right, and then we're going to change this to title and title. All right, and then another thing we want to do is, since we're already doing an import here, we're saying import Flask. We can also do this on one line by just doing comma separations. And we also want to take in this thing called URL4, because the next thing that our website needs is it needs to have the ability to link style sheets. So we're going to say we need to add a style sheet to our page, and the href is going to be where it points to. Okay, and we can just close it off that way. So now what we can do is we can say, you know what, we want you to look inside the static, and let's just say we're going to have a main.css file. All right, so now that we've done that, let's create a static folder inside the root directory. And then inside of here, we're going to create a new folder called CSS. And then we're going to create a new file called main.css. And we're going to change our h1 to a different color so that we can test that out. And we're going to change it to color red so that we know that it's working. And then we go back over to the templates, and you can see that we're referencing this here. And by default, so we need to fix our reference here, because this is going to be, we want this to say static. And really, I probably don't need the maybe I do. I probably need the / there. We're going to test this out here. I'm not sure if this will work. And let's go ahead and get rid of this. We're just going to put the title in here for right now, since we don't pass the name anymore. But what we want to do is we want this page to load, and we want Flask to load it for us so that we can change this h1 to a color of red. All right, and by default, that actually works. Flask recently made some updates where before this URL4, I was actually thinking that we were going to have to use that to explicitly state that we wanted to return CSS for a specific file. But the fact of the matter is if you create a static folder in your root directory, and then you have JavaScript, like let's fill this out. Like we should have a JavaScript folder, because every website has JavaScript, and then we should also have images, right? So those are the three things that a static website or static web server should be handling, which is JavaScript, CSS, and images. There are servers out there that are handling traffic like IAS, which stands for information. I have no idea. Actually, I don't remember what it stands for anymore. It's Microsoft Server. They have like SQL Server 2000, SQL Server, whatever it is. But you have all these different web servers out there, right? Like, so IIS is like the main server for Windows. You have Nginx, which is like one of the fastest web servers for dealing with a lot of static content like JavaScript and images. So Nginx is like the fastest for that. And then you have other servers like Apache. So many websites you'll see Flask set up where it's like most of the requests and responses from the server are handled via Apache, but all the static resources are all inside of one folder. And then there's a specific web server like Nginx, which handles static content better, that literally just handles that static content. So this sort of like mechanism of creating a static folder and all that stuff, it might seem confusing and weird, but like the more times you do it, the more natural it'll be. And you'll notice that like the same thing applies to all these different web frameworks, whether you're using Laravel or Ruby on Rails or something like that. So it's all very similar. All right, guys. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and modify our, since we do have CSS now working, that's great. What we want to do is go ahead and add a basic JavaScript library. And in case you guys are interested, I have a million tutorials out there on everything from how to get started with React and all kinds of other modern day client-side stuff. But in my recommendation, if you're just starting with single page apps, you might as well go with jQuery, because it's just simply one file include, and we can use it for a lot of DOM manipulation and also for AJAX calls, and it's going to save on the amount of time that you have to do it. And regardless of what anybody says, jQuery, I write it like literally almost every day at work. So like everybody's using it still. It's all over the place. And regardless of what the hipsters say, like hipsters don't speak for business and the way the IT world works. So my point is that it doesn't hurt to learn jQuery. It does not hurt at all. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at this here. There's actually a CDN, which one of the great things is that you can see, let's see, okay, where's the CDN? There it is. Using, okay, CDN, stack path, blah, blah, blah. Where you at? Where you at? Where you at? This is, you know what? They give you all kinds of different CDNs that you can choose from. But here's jQuery. We're going to use Google, right? Everybody trusts Google, right? They're not going to do anything bad. They're not evil. Just kidding. Anyway, like we're going to go ahead and paste this in here. So all you got to do is just paste this script tag, and it's going to load jQuery for you. And now by doing so, we can go ahead and start using that. And it just saves us a lot of time. I'll just show you an example of that. All right, so here's our website, right? So let's go ahead and I'm going to right click on my browser and say inspect, and then go into my console. And if jQuery is working, I should just be able to say something like this, like give me the title tag. Boom, it worked. All right, so then title.text, what is that? What is that? Our website. Okay, there. So it's finding it. So right, so that's jQuery. jQuery is already working. We're able to select elements that way, just as easy with that. Just as easy. And then there's also like the AJAX functionality of jQuery, which is what I want to use. I don't want to have to sit there and teach you guys how to install a million things just so you can see an AJAX example of React. Although I do have videos on that. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and look at how to actually make a an AJAX post to our application. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new route that we're going to use to get some data, right? And we're just going to call this data. That's going to be the name of the endpoint that we have to actually type in to get to, and we'll just call this data as well. And here we're just going to just simply return, for right now, let's just return test. We're just going to return just a simple string. Now in single page apps and HTTP, you have two different requests, right? The two major ones, which is get and post. So anytime you're just getting data, you probably want to do a get request. And if you're going to be changing data and posting data to the server, and or changing data, you're going to do a post request, right? So those are the differences between the two. But for right now, we're just going to do a get request so that we can return back this test value. So we need to go into our HTML, and we're going to create a button that is actually going to be what is clicked on. So let's go ahead and say click is going to be the name, and we're going to say click me for Ajax. All right, so we need to go ahead and wire up the click event. So just since we're going to be using jQuery, we need to have our script tag after jQuery is loaded. And let's go ahead and create a new script tag, and here we can go ahead and use anything that's in here. So we can actually say, let's go ahead and do an Ajax post, and then inside of here we're going to take a we pass in an object. So we're going to do a get request first. So let's, I say Ajax post, but Ajax get request first. So we'll say get. And then the URL, this is where we say what URL you want to hit. So we're going to say URL is going to be data. And then we're going to say, we're not passing any data, so we don't need to worry about that. But then on success, you're going to have a function here. So the function is going to say, in fact, this could be probably even, we'll do the full scale function. We'll say on success, the function is going to say alert, and then here you're going to get a response back from the server. So we're going to say, let's just alert the response from the server. All right. So that's our Ajax call. So right now though, this thing's going to call automatically, and we don't want to do that. So we need to go ahead and wire up a click event. So we're going to say, you know what? When the ID of click is click, then we're going to want you to fire off this function, and everything inside this Ajax call is going to be put inside that function. So that way this function isn't going to be called until it's ready. All right, until we click the button, not on page load. All right. So we're just going to alert the response to the screen. All right, so here we go. We have it loaded up now. And if we go ahead and click the button, we get the result back from the server, and we get the test response. So if you remember correctly, that test response came from the server. So we did a call right to our server backend. We got some data back without any sort of page refresh or anything like that. So that is the gist of a single page app. You have one page that loads, and then from there, it's going to be individual calls to get not an entire page of HTML, but just get certain chunks of data. So you could get chunks of HTML, you could get just JSON data, and then use JavaScript to take that JSON data and put it into your HTML, which is what a lot of those libraries like React and Vue and Angular are doing. Or you could do it all manually just using jQuery. So as an example, instead of just doing the alert response, what we can do is we can actually say, you know what, let's go ahead and say find the H1 on the page and then take its text and replace it with the response. What happens then? This is all using jQuery. So we say find H1. This will find any H1 on the page and return all and change all the text. But we know that our HTML page just has one H1. So if we go here and we click this, we can now see that we changed it to test. We click it over and over again, it's going to automatically change test to test. So it's doing it every time I click it, but it just doesn't look like it. We could toggle it back and forth actually. So one of the things that single page application developers need to understand is that the main way that data transformation occurs these days on the web is via this stuff called JSON, which is really just a JavaScript object. So a JavaScript object is a curly brace syntax of key value pairs. So if I were going to type right into my console here and then let's say let x equals this is an object, right? So then I could say x.title equals Chris, and that's a string. So if I said what is x, like it tells you, okay, it's got this title with a string on it. So now I can also say x.names equals a array of values, right? 1, 2, 3. So now if I type x, you now have a title, and then you also have this name, which is an array on it. So basically this JSON data structure it can be very, very complex just based on a few different types, which is really just Booleans, strings, numbers, arrays, and then other dictionaries / objects. So how do we actually get JSON data to return from our server the way most RESTful APIs work? And then let's go ahead and just say we'll create a variable called my data. And this is going to equal a Python dictionary. So a Python dictionary is basically the same thing as a JavaScript object. It's a bunch of key value pairs. So I can do the same thing. I can say title, Chris, names. Names is a list of values 1, 2, 3. All right, so just like this, but this is Python instead of JavaScript. So in order to actually return this, there's something we want to import from Flask, which is called JSON Fi. And this is automatically going to serialize your Python dictionary to a JSON data object instead of having to do a bunch of magic or anything like that, or it does the magic for you basically. But we're going to say JSON Fi and then my data, the name of the variable that we wanted to serialize. So now if we go and request the data, we're now going to get this data object back. So instead of getting a string, we click here. Oh, we're not alerting anything though. Let's go back to our test.html, and we're going to go back here and we're going to say, let's just alert the response again. Okay. Also, you can see that we are getting an error message here that says title is not defined. Oh, we're not passing title back anymore. Or no, we are. Title. It is defined. So why are you saying that? Maybe we just had to restart it, or maybe not. I'm not sure. No, we have an error. Sorry, my bad. This is my JavaScript days. It has to be like this in Python. You have to have them both in curly braces. So that is the difference between JavaScript and the Python version. So now you get this, though. You get this object back. So it's like, what is this object? Well, it's an actual JavaScript object that's being returned from the server. So if we wanted to see the result of that object, I could actually say in the JavaScript, I could say JSON.stringify the response. And now we should get this like actual, instead of it saying object, you should actually see the string value of whatever that object is. So we go over here, we click on that, and you can now see that we get the string representation of what that JavaScript object is. But typically you don't want the string when you're dealing with JavaScript, right? Because when JavaScript is dealing with objects, you want it to be an actual object, not the string representation of an object. But there are times that you do have to turn an object to a string and then turn a string back to an object, and that's how you do it. All right, guys, so that is essentially it when it comes to building single page apps. You're essentially going to have your one main page, and then you're going to have a bunch of different route requests that you're going to do to get data, and then you're going to post data. But ultimately, you're just going to have one HTML page, and JavaScript is going to handle all of the client-side manipulation of the HTML based on subsequent data requests and posts after the initial page is loaded. There's tools that you can use to actually take advantage of certain things. Like one of the things that isn't talked about enough, I don't think, is HTML5 local storage. Local storage is something where like you could actually take, and it's supported on all the major browsers, but you can take any sort of JavaScript object and turn it to, you turn it to a string first, but then you can actually store it to the client's browser. And let me show you an example of that. So like say that this data right here, we're going to pretend that like this profile, his name is Chris, and like he has badges. So like pretend like you end up validating some person, and you're getting some profile data back on this guy. If you were to do that, instead of me like just alerting the response, what I can actually do is I can say, you know what, I want to take local storage and just save the result there. So it's literally as easy as this. So I could say local storage dot set item, and then you give it the value that you want. So I'm going to say this is the profile, right? And then I'm going to say that I want to do the JSON dot stringify, because it has to be a string, so you need to take the object and turn it to a string to save it to local storage. And I'm going to say go ahead and save that to the local storage. And we're going to say this button is now going to say load profile, and this one's going to say then we're going to create another button here, read profile. All right, and here, in fact, we'll even have this display. We'll put a style, inline style on this to say display none. So this thing does not show up as far as the read profile, but then upon a local successful response, we're going to go ahead and take the ID of read response, and we're going to make it visible. All right, so upon successful loading, we're now going to show this button. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and hide the other button, since we're no longer using that, and that's called click. It's a terrible name for it, but we're going to say click is also going to say hide. So we're going to hide that one and show the other one upon successful loading. And then we also want to say let's create a function for the read response click. So read response dot click function, and then inside of here, this is where we're going to say, let's go ahead and create a variable, and we're going to say profile equals, and this is where we're going to actually say, let's go ahead and read the local storage item. So we're going to say local storage dot get item, and if you remember, the name is profile, but then we also need to go ahead and say, I want to turn that, we'll keep it as a string for right now, and we're going to say alert the profile. So we'll see that it's a string coming from local storage. But then I'm going to do a separate alert, which I'm going to say changing to an object now. And then we're going to take our profile and say it equals, in fact, we can even just say alerts JSON.parse, and then this is how you turn it from a string to an object, and we're going to say local storage dot get item profile. All right, so there's a lot of stuff going on there, but we're getting the profile, we're turning it back to an object. First, we're reading it from local storage as a string. Let me recap all this. When the page loads, this button is going to be here that says load profile. You click it, it's going to hide. This button is going to show. Upon clicking the button, this is going to make an AJAX call to our server. It's going to then take the response. It's going to turn it to local storage to save it on the client's machine. It's then going to hide the, well, it's going to show the read response button. It's going to hide the other button. And then this is going to be called when you click the button that is then shown, which it's going to say, hey, let's go ahead and create a profile variable from the local storage item called profile. We're going to alert that value, which will be a string. And then we're going to alert this message to say that we're changing it to an object from a string. And then we're going to go ahead and alert that value one more time. And this time it should be an actual JSON object. So this is just an example of how you can do an AJAX post, get some value back, store it on the client's machine. And that's how people do it. Like, when was the last time they were loaded in, you know, like, if you look at Stack Overflow, you log in, you have all kinds of like local storage, all kinds of cookies and stuff that is related to your profile and what's going on with you and, you know, with that site. All right, so let's go back to the website. And here we now have the load profile. Click that, boom, it's gone, and we must have some sort of error message. Or maybe not. All right, this is where we got something going on. Let's go ahead and put a breakpoint here. Refresh. All right, so we got read response dot show. Is that the name of it? Oh, it's read profile. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we got a bug. All right, that's the bug. Instead of read response, it's read profile. Read profile. All right, sorry about that. Let's go back. Load profile, there's the read profile, and now we read, and boom, you see the string representation of the JSON object that we got stored to local storage. We're reading it, now we're changing it, and now you see it's an object. Boom, just like that. All right, another thing you want to keep in mind as well is that you can reference your local storage by going over to the application panel, and if you go over to the local storage option and you click the arrow button, you're going to see the website name, and right now it's localhost for Flask, and you can see that we're storing this information in there. If you wanted to get rid of it, you could just say localstorage.clear. That will get rid of everything. Or you can just simply say localstorage.remove item, and then give it the name of the item that you want to remove. So anyways, it's definitely some awesome information. The key value, obviously, here's the key profile, and then this is the value over here. And then this kind of just gives you a close-up of that value. All right, guys, so that's really where I'm going to end this tutorial series. Hopefully you guys have learned something here. This is basically just the gist of how you start up a single-page application. The concepts and fundamentals kind of remain the same across different stacks. And there's all kinds of different tools that you can use, from JavaScript to, like, with Python, to just kind of assist with routing, with grouping, database access, all kinds of different things. But I would recommend that if you're doing single page architecture, it's important to get the architecture down and to understand that very well before you start jumping into a million other tools. So I would actually start, I think it's great to just start simple and small, stay with Flask, HTML, CSS, and then jQuery, just to, you know, if you want to save some time. Now, if you do want to go ahead and bring in all those other tools, then of course you're going to have a lot more setup from there. And I do have some tutorials on that, but I just really think it throws off the entire concept of this tutorial, which is just focusing on single page architecture. All right, guys, thanks for watching and have a good day. Bye.